The rise of Antichrist. Inasmuch as Daniel chapter 11 is our most detailed source for the military and political events of the tribulation's first half, and covers those events in a roughly chronological sequence, we will rely upon it heavily for the remainder of this study. Chapter 11 details, among other things, the specifics of Antichrist's rise to power within his native land, his subsequent seizure of the revived Roman Empire, his conquest of the Southern Alliance, his oppression of Israel, and many of his methods of control. It should therefore be pointed out here that both the main purpose of that chapter and the bulk of its content are focused upon Antichrist. It is often overlooked among exegetes of this critical chapter that Daniel chapter 10, the setup for an introduction to chapter 11, directs the reader's attention regarding the application of that prophetic chapter directly to the end times from the very start. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a prophecy, that is, chapter 11, was unveiled to Daniel, who had the name Belteshazzar. And the prophecy was true, and it concerned the great conflict, or war, that is, the tribulation itself. And he understood this prophecy, for its interpretation came to him in a vision. Daniel 1. For I have come to give you insight into what will happen to your people at the end of days. For this vision pertains to those days of the distant future. Daniel 10:14. Taking these passages in reverse order, as we saw in our treatment of Jacob's prophecy in Genesis chapter 49, end of days in the second passage is a prophetic expression which invariably refers to the end times, just as the angel's statement in the final sentence quoted shows for this context as well. That is to say, what we have here is a reference not just to the future, but to the eschatological future. That is, to the final phase of human history, which begins with the tribulation, Isaiah 2:2 and Jeremiah 30:24. The phrase "the great conflict," or war, in the first passage quoted, Hebrew Tzab HaGadol, does not, of course, refer to either world war, but to the tribulation itself, the greatest period of military conflict in world history, both human and angelic, when the two greatest coalitions of all time will do battle during the tribulation as the great nation-kingdom of Antichrist's dual empire, Babylon ruling over revived Rome, clashes with the nation and kingdom of the massive Southern Alliance, Matthew 24:7. During the course of which Satan and his angels will be cast to earth after their war with Michael and his angels, Revelation 12:7, and at the end of which Antichrist and his armies will be annihilated by our returning Lord Jesus Christ, Revelation 19:11 through 21. So while the first half of chapter 11 does deal with Alexander's conquests and the subsequent campaigns of the Seleucid kings, verses 2 through 20, all relatively near-term events from Daniel's perspective when compared to the still future tribulation, it is clear that the main thrust and purpose of the prophecy is to explain the even now yet to come reign of Antichrist. The purpose of this long prologue is primarily to bring the timeline down to Antiochus Epiphanes, the most egregious of these Seleucid kings, and, as we have seen, the most important representative type of Antichrist. Many interpreters, failing to appreciate the typology in play here, have argued for the postponement of this chapter's application to Antichrist until verse 36. But even these commentators generally acknowledge that by verse 36, Antichrist is indeed already being described, and that the same king is clearly in view in both sections of the chapter. Limiting verses 21 through 35 to Antiochus Epiphanes and failing to see their dual application to Antichrist as well is an unnecessary and unfortunate mistake. Quite apart from the content of verses 21 to 35, which point definitively to Antichrist in his own right, he is after all the Prince of the Covenant, the flow of the narrative clearly binds these two putatively independent sections into one contiguous whole. It will thus be helpful at this point to give in outline form a synopsis of the second half of Daniel chapter 11 before we proceed. Verse 21, Synopsis of the Beast's Career, Part 1. His rise to power and his methodology in seizing control of Mystery Babylon. Verse 22, Synopsis of the Beast's Career, Part 2. Mobilization for and destruction at Armageddon. Identification of Antichrist as the prophesied Prince of the Covenant. Verse 23. Return to the chronological order by reprising Antichrist's methods in gaining control of Mystery Babylon. Verse 24. Seizure of the 7 kingdoms, revived Rome, consolidation of power and preparations for attacking the Southern Alliance. Verses 25 through 28. The first campaign against the 3 kingdoms, the Southern Alliance. Verses 29 through 30. The second campaign against the South. Verses 30 through 35. The attempted assassination of Antichrist, his putative resuscitation, and his resultant persecution of Israel. Verses 36 through 39. The reign of Antichrist during the Great Tribulation. Verses 40 through 43. Reprise of Antichrist's victory over the Southern Alliance during the Tribulation's first half, giving a more detailed account of the second campaign. Verse 44. The departure of Antichrist from Israel to secure his kingdom, following the 5th bowl judgment. Verse 45. The defeat of Antichrist at Armageddon. We have already covered the phrase man of contempt, as well as the typology which connects the beast to one of his most important historical types, Antiochus Epiphanes, the putative subject of Daniel 11:21 through 35. What primarily concerns us in this first section of our study, Daniel 11:21 through 23, is Antichrist's initial rise to power in his home country. And there will arise in his place a man of contempt, upon whom they will not bestow the honor of the kingship. That is, he will not come to power in a legal, conventional way. Rather, he will come to power through seductive methods, and will take control of his kingdom, that is, Mystery Babylon, by means of duplicity. Now it is from him that the floodwaters, that is, armies, Daniel 9:26 and 11:40, will pour forth and be shattered, that is, at Armageddon, for he is even the Prince of the Covenant, that is, the author of the pseudo-messianic peace treaty with Israel, Daniel 9:27. After men have leagued themselves to him, he will set his conspiracy in motion, and will grow in power and become very strong, even though his faction is small. Daniel 11:21 through 23.